In April of 1943, high above the war-torn skies of Europe, something new appeared on the horizon. It was not elegant. It was not sleek. And to the men of the Luftwaffe, it was not intimidating. German pilots, hardened by years of combat, watched as the massive American aircraft approached. Its bulky fuselage and wide frame made it look almost clumsy in the air. Some laughed. They called it a flying milk bottle. To them, this new American fighter was a curiosity, not a threat. But war has a way of turning assumptions into fatal mistakes. Because within months, those same pilots would learn a lesson written in fire and steel. And they would never laugh again. The aircraft they mocked was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and it was about to change the air war forever. At the beginning of 1943, the United States faced a brutal reality in Europe. American bombers were flying deep into German-controlled territory, targeting factories, railways, and infrastructure vital to the Nazi war machine. These missions were dangerous. Unescorted bombers were easy targets for German fighters. The Luftwaffe, experienced and highly skilled, struck with precision and deadly efficiency. For every successful bombing run, there was a cost. Aircraft lost, crews missing, lives extinguished in seconds. The United States needed a solution. Not just another fighter aircraft, but something capable of surviving intense combat, protecting bombers, and taking the fight directly to the enemy. What they got was something few initially understood. The P-47 Thunderbolt was unlike anything that had come before it. Designed around a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, it was one of the most powerful piston engines ever installed in a fighter aircraft. But power came at a cost. The aircraft was enormous. Weighing over 7 tons when fully loaded, it dwarfed many of its contemporaries. Its thick fuselage housed an advanced turbo supercharger system, allowing it to maintain performance at high altitudes where other aircraft struggled. But to the eye, it looked heavy, too big, too slow. Even some American pilots doubted it. Compared to the sleek German Messerschmitt Bf 109 or the agile Focke-Wulf 190, the Thunderbolt seemed out of place in a dogfight. It wasn't built like a predator. It looked like a target. When the P-47 first entered combat in April of 1943, those doubts seemed justified. Early missions exposed its weaknesses. At lower altitudes, it struggled to match the agility of German fighters. In turning engagements, it often found itself at a disadvantage. German pilots quickly learned how to exploit this. They attacked from advantageous angles, using their superior maneuverability to outturn and outposition the American aircraft. For a time, it seemed that the Luftwaffe had been right. The Thunderbolt was not the solution the United States had hoped for. It was just another aircraft trying to survive in a sky already dominated by experienced German aces. But the story did not end there. Because the P-47 was never meant to fight like the aircraft it was compared to. It was something different. And once American pilots began to understand its true strengths, everything began to change. The first realization came with altitude. At heights above 25,000 feet, the Thunderbolt transformed. Its turbo supercharger allowed it to maintain engine power where other aircraft began to lose performance. German fighters, optimized for lower and medium altitudes, struggled to keep up. At 30,000 feet, the P-47 had the advantage. It could climb, accelerate, and fight in conditions where the Luftwaffe was less effective. This was not a limitation. It was an opportunity. The second realization was speed. Not in level flight, but in the dive. The Thunderbolt was incredibly strong. Its rugged construction allowed it to withstand forces that would tear other aircraft apart. This meant one thing: it could dive faster than almost anything else in the sky. When a P-47 entered a dive, it became nearly unstoppable. German pilots who tried to follow often found themselves pushing their aircraft beyond safe limits. Some lost control. Some never recovered. And those who survived learned quickly: do not follow a Thunderbolt in a dive. The most terrifying realization came from its firepower. 8. That is how many .50 caliber machine guns the P-47 carried. 8, each capable of tearing through metal, fuel tanks, and flesh. Together, they created something terrifying: a wall of bullets. With over 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a single burst could shred an enemy aircraft in seconds. German pilots who once laughed now faced a storm of fire, and survival became a matter of seconds. One pilot, Robert S. Johnson, would become a symbol of what the Thunderbolt could endure. During a mission, his aircraft was hit again and again. Cannon fire, machine gun fire. His plane was torn apart, controls damaged, fuel leaking. Yet somehow he kept flying. A German fighter moved in behind him. Close. Close enough to finish it. Johnson waited for the final moment, but it never came. The German pilot circled him, studying the damaged aircraft. Then he saluted and flew away. Later, they counted more than 200 bullet holes in Johnson's aircraft, and still the Thunderbolt brought him home. By late 1943, the laughter had disappeared. German pilots no longer underestimated the P-47. They respected it. They avoided it. They feared it.
By the end of 1943, the skies over Europe were no longer the same. What had once been a place of confidence for German pilots was becoming a place of hesitation. Because now, when they saw the silhouette of the P-47, they no longer saw an easy target. They saw a threat they could not ignore. American tactics continued to evolve. Pilots learned to trust the strength of their aircraft. They climbed higher than before. They waited. They observed. And when the moment came, they struck with overwhelming force. The Thunderbolt became a master of what pilots called the boom and zoom, a method of attack built on altitude, speed, and surprise. From high above, P-47s would dive toward enemy formations with incredible velocity. The sky would close in, the distance would vanish, and in a matter of seconds, they were upon their targets. There was no warning that could save you, no maneuver that could guarantee escape. Only instinct, and instinct was often not enough. German pilots began reporting something new: encounters that ended too quickly, attacks that came out of nowhere, aircraft that seemed to appear from the sun, fire a devastating burst, and disappear before a response was even possible. The Thunderbolt was not just fighting, it was controlling the fight. At high altitude, it had the advantage. In a dive, it had the advantage. In firepower, it had the advantage. And in survivability, it had something no other aircraft could match. There were stories repeated across squadrons, stories of P-47s returning to base with engines damaged, wings torn, fuselages shattered. Stories of pilots who should not have survived, but did, again and again. Because the Thunderbolt was built differently. Its radial engine could absorb damage that would destroy liquid-cooled engines in other fighters. It had no vulnerable radiator system that could be easily punctured. Its thick airframe protected the pilot like armor, and when things went wrong, it gave its pilot a second chance. For German pilots, this created a new kind of problem. Even when they scored hits, it was not always enough. Even when they believed they had won, the Thunderbolt kept flying. And that changed everything. Because in war, uncertainty is dangerous, and the P-47 introduced uncertainty into every engagement. By early 1944, the Thunderbolt had fully established itself as a dominant force in the skies over Europe. But its role was about to expand even further. It was no longer just a high-altitude escort fighter, it was becoming something else, something even more feared, a hunter on the ground. As Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Europe, air power became critical, not just in the sky, but on the battlefield below. Supply lines, railways, convoys, fuel depots, everything that kept the German war machine moving had to be destroyed, and the Thunderbolt was the perfect tool for the job. With its ability to carry bombs and rockets, combined with its unmatched durability, the P-47 became one of the most effective ground attack aircraft of the war. German troops began to hear it before they saw it, a deep, rolling sound, a distant thunder that grew louder with every passing second, and then chaos. Trucks exploded, trains derailed, columns of soldiers scattered in panic, fuel depots erupted into fire. The attacks were fast, relentless, and devastating. German soldiers gave it a name, Jabo, short for fighter bomber. But the name carried something more than description. It carried fear. Because when the Jabos came, destruction followed. Pilots would descend from the sky at incredible speed, release their bombs, fire their rockets, and then sweep the area with machine gun fire that tore through everything in its path. There was no safe place, no warning, no escape. The Thunderbolt had become more than a fighter, it had become a weapon of domination. And the numbers began to reflect that reality. Thousands of enemy aircraft destroyed in the air, tens of thousands of vehicles destroyed on the ground, railways crippled, supply chains broken. The war was changing, and the Thunderbolt was helping to shape that change. Even German high command began to take notice. Reports described increasing losses, decreasing effectiveness, rising fear among both pilots and ground forces. Because the Thunderbolt did something few weapons could do. It attacked everywhere, in the sky, on the ground, at high altitude, at low altitude, day after day. It was constant, relentless, unavoidable. And then came another evolution. In 1944, improvements were introduced that made the P-47 even more effective. A new paddle blade propeller increased thrust, acceleration improved, climb performance increased. Now, the aircraft that had once been mocked for its size was outperforming expectations in every category that mattered. It was faster, stronger, deadlier, and by this point, there was no more laughter. German pilots knew exactly what they were facing, and many chose not to engage unless absolutely necessary, because survival now depended on caution, on awareness, on avoiding the Thunderbolt whenever possible. But avoidance was not always an option, because the skies over Europe were becoming increasingly controlled by Allied forces, and the P-47 was one of the reasons why. Every mission it flew tightened that control. Every engagement it survived reinforced its reputation. Every target it destroyed weakened the enemy. And slowly, the balance of power shifted. What had once been a contested sky was becoming dominated. And at the center of that dominance was the Thunderbolt.
By the time 1944 turned into 1945, the outcome of the air war over Europe was no longer uncertain. The Luftwaffe, once dominant, once feared, once in control of the skies, was fading. Aircraft were still flying, pilots were still fighting, but something had changed. Confidence had been replaced by caution, aggression by survival. And among the many reasons for that change was a machine they had once dismissed, the P-47 Thunderbolt. It had not been perfect, it had not been elegant, it had not followed the traditional rules of what a fighter should be, but it had endured. And in war, endurance often decides the outcome. By the final year of the conflict, the Thunderbolt had proven itself in every role it was given. High above the clouds, it escorted bombers deep into enemy territory. It climbed to altitudes where engines struggled to breathe and fought where others could not. It dove with unstoppable force, turning speed into survival
and survival into victory. Below, on the ground, it became something even more feared. Convoys vanished under its attacks. Railways collapsed into twisted metal. Columns of vehicles burned across roads that once carried the lifeblood of the German war effort. Fuel, ammunition, reinforcements, all of it became vulnerable, because the Thunderbolt could reach them anywhere, at any time. German soldiers learned to listen, not just to look, but to listen, because sometimes you heard it before you saw it, a distant rumble, a low thunder in the sky, and in that moment, you knew the attack was coming. There are accounts from soldiers on the ground who described the experience in simple terms. You did not fight it, you survived it. That was the reality, because the P-47 did not give you a fair fight. It gave you seconds. Seconds to react, seconds to move, seconds to hope. And often, that was not enough. German pilots, those who had once laughed, now spoke with a different tone. Respect. Even among experienced aces, there was acknowledgement. This aircraft, this machine, had changed the way the war was fought. Not through elegance, not through precision alone, but through power, through resilience, through overwhelming presence. There were no illusions left. The Thunderbolt was not just another fighter. It was a system, a product of American industry, American engineering, American strategy, built not just to perform, but to be produced in numbers, in scale, in force. Over 15,000 Thunderbolts were built, each one carrying the same strength, the same firepower, the same purpose. And together, they created something larger than any single aircraft. They created pressure, constant pressure, on the ground, in the air, across entire regions. And that pressure broke systems. It broke supply lines. It broke coordination. It broke confidence. And once confidence is broken, the outcome becomes inevitable. By the closing months of the war, the skies belonged to the Allies, and the Thunderbolt had earned its place among the machines that made that possible. But beyond the numbers, beyond the victories, beyond the destruction, there is something else, something that cannot be measured. The men. The pilots who flew these aircraft, who climbed into cockpits knowing that each mission could be their last, who trusted their machine not because it was perfect, but because it could bring them home, who faced fear not once, but again and again, and still they flew, again and again, because that is what the war demanded, and that is what they gave, everything. The Thunderbolt became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of resilience, of determination, of a different way of thinking, a way that did not rely on perfection, but on strength, a way that did not depend on being untouchable, but on being unbreakable. And in the end, that made all the difference. The aircraft that had once been called a flying milk bottle had become something else entirely, a storm in the sky, a force that could not be ignored, a machine that turned doubt into dominance. And for those who faced it, it was not something you forgot, it was something you survived, if you were lucky. Because when the Thunderbolt came, it did not ask for permission, it did not wait, it arrived, with speed, with fire, and with a purpose that could not be stopped. And long after the war ended, its legacy remained, not just in history books, not just in museums, but in the memory of those who saw it, heard it, felt it. The sound of thunder in a clear sky, and the knowledge that everything was about to change. This was the P-47 Thunderbolt, and this was the voice of war.